Diagnostics in 2006, and then the CEO of the overall Roche Group in 2008. Dr. Schwan will give his keynote entitled Innovate or Bust. I would like to point out that Dr. Schwan has kindly agreed to have a 30-minute Q&A session afterwards, so please do have your questions ready, although I'm sure there will be loads. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Severin Schwan.
Thank you, Christian. Pleasure to be here. And it's a particular pleasure to talk about innovation. It's a topic which is very close to my heart, and it's at the very core of our company's strategy. So what I'd like to do over the next 30 minutes or so, provide you with an external perspective around our business model, what I see as the key challenges around that business model as we go forward, and then really turn in a second part of my speech more to the internal perspective. What does it actually take to generate innovation? What kind of culture, what kind of leadership promotes innovation? And I'd like to share my personal view on that very point. So let me start with the business model. Fundamentally, our business model is a contract with society. We take the risk to invest into research and development, and in turn we get exclusivity, typically in the form of patents, for a defined period of time. That's what incentivizes us, that's what keeps the business model going. And that is really the company view. If you look at it from a society point of view, the real benefits only kick in when the medicines actually, when the patents of the medicines actually expire, because this is the moment when generic companies come in, when they can offer the medicines at much lower cost. And to illustrate this, I'd like to refer to a list which is called the List of the Most Essential Medicines. It has been developed by the WHO. It was originally really a guiding document for developing governments on which medicines to focus when they build up a healthcare delivery system. As a company, we are very proud that we have most medicines, the company with most medicines on that very list. We have 21 medicines on this list. All of them today are generic, are off patent. And one of them, the third one here in infections, the trade name is called Bactrim, which is a broadband antibioticum, which is still widely used, but it is today generic companies who would distribute this product. And I mention this product because for this antibioticum there is really very good data. So it has been closely followed, and the effect of this medicine has been closely followed by governments around the world. And what we know is that with this single medicine alone, more lives have been saved than World War I and World War II has taken. It's pretty amazing. And to me, it shows so clearly that this business model, this contract with society, has really, really paid off for mankind. Now, there are challenges here, and even though it has paid off for mankind literally over the last century, it's not only about infectious diseases. If you look at the progress which has been made in other diseases, HIV, cancer, for example, it is all because of this business model. Nevertheless, the question remains, does it still pay off for the companies? And there are lots of people out there who are really concerned. And I've just kind of highlighted the four key concerns you come across. And I come across actually almost every week when I talk with the financial community. They would ask on the scientific side, have all the low-hanging fruits already been harvested? They would point out to increasing regulatory hurdles. It's just listen to the IP landscape. I'll make a few comments on those. And then finally, of course, we know that the pressure on prices, the pressure on public households is dramatically increasing, and so is the pressure, of course, on our prices for medicines. Let me just make a comment on intellectual property. And there are indeed lots of challenges, and some of them have been referred to. Compliance with TRIPS. Yes, India has joined TRIPS after they joined the WTO. But just to have the law is one thing, then to actually execute it and not override it with compulsory licenses is another thing. I'd also like to point out one other point which I find is very critical, and we as a company have come across that several times. Typically, in particular in cancer drugs, what you often see is you start off with the first indication, but whilst you have your product on the market, the patent life is running. So at a certain point, you know, you have new scientific insights and you'd like to develop this very same medicine, for example, for another indication. And it has happened more than once to me that for pure commercial reasons, we would not have taken the risk to develop this medicine for an additional indication, simply because you come to the end of the patent life and the medicine would very soon go generic. And I do believe we need a dialogue with governments, with regulatory authorities to find ways to make that a win-win for companies on the one hand and the society on the other hand, so that these medicines really come to patients and are really developed. Now, what I would like to say, however, is nevertheless, I take a very optimistic view here. Because if you remember back in the early 90s, many emerging markets didn't have any patent laws. So actually, from today's perspective, we have already a much more differentiated discussion. It's about, you know, what is a patent, when is a patent to be protected, how can we fine-tune it? But actually, a lot has happened. And if you look over the last 20 years, even though you read so much about potential violations of IP, etc., actually, if you look at the big picture, then IP protection, in my view, has improved and actually is improving as we speak. So, you know, in spite of all these challenges, we take a very positive view. And there are two fundamental beliefs, I would say. First is that science will progress. I can't prove that. But I'm absolutely sure when we meet here again in 10 years, we won't look back to, what is it, the 31st of March 2014, and this was the day when science started to stop, or the progress of science started to stop. I don't believe that. I think science will progress. I actually believe that we will have almost an explosion in terms of understanding diseases, understanding the underlying causes of diseases, understanding the molecular pathways, and as such, we will have new targets. If you think of all the revolution in genomics ongoing, and those targets, again, we can take as a basis to turn into new medicines. The second fundamental belief I have is, in spite of all the price pressure and all the discussion around it, I'm absolutely convinced, and I can't prove it either, we'll meet again in 10 years, that if you come up with really differentiated medicines, medicines which make a difference in the quality of life, which make a difference in terms of prolonging life, I think societies and patients will continue to reward such innovation. And this is the very reason why we keep spending and investing into research and development every year. We as a company, we spend $10 billion every year into research and development. And now you can also see why innovation is so close to my heart and why this is of critical importance. Now, the concept is all fine, but then the question is, now how actually do you generate the innovation? You know, when we can agree that science will progress and societies will continue to reward such innovation, that doesn't answer the question of whether you as a company actually generate new innovation. And it's a very critical question for myself also. and I've heard I'm a lawyer. So what can I actually contribute? What can I do in my role as CEO to foster an environment where innovation happens, where innovation is thriving? And I'd like to share 5 elements which I believe are important to create an environment where innovation happens. First one, allow for duplication. On a very fundamental level, I believe that innovation has a lot to do with freedom. I think that creative people need freedom. They need space to breathe. If you tell people all the time what they have to do, if you bury people in standard operating procedure, all what you get out is what you tell them. But what you don't get is really breakthrough innovations. I believe freedom is essential. And from an organizational point of view, from a management point of view, I therefore very much believe in a decentralized management approach. I very much believe in an approach where you have smaller, independent, autonomous units who have the power to take their own decisions, to do it their way. Now, in our company, to illustrate that, I have 4 research and development groups directly reporting to myself. So we have a research center in San Francisco, we have a research center in Switzerland, we have one in Shanghai, and we have an organization which we call partnering, which really takes care of external opportunities, licensing opportunities, where we bring external innovation into the company. And all 4 of them are directly reporting to myself. There's nobody in between. And that's the way how I personally assure that we have a decentralized approach and that those groups have their own way of making their decisions. The moment you bring somebody in, the moment you have one global R&D head who might not even report directly to the CEO, at that very moment, I'm afraid you start to converge things and you start to kind of harmonize decision-making, which I think is not good to foster innovation. About 5 years ago, we bought out the minority of Genentech, which is a biotech company in South San Francisco. This was just at the time when I got CEO. Now, this was an acquisition of over 40 billion US dollars. So imagine, I just got CEO, we do this acquisition. So it was really important for me to get that right. You know, obviously I thought a lot about how do we integrate Genentech? How do we make this work? And the main concern, both internally and also externally, was that we would lose this special spirit at the place. Genentech is known in the industry for really being cutting edge in science. So there was this danger, do we lose the best people, etc. And you can imagine, I was very worried about that. And what we did is, in terms of integration, we didn't integrate them. It's also much easier. Keeps your work-life balance in order. And I mean this seriously. I mean this seriously. I mean, Richard Scheller, who is the head of this unit, directly reports to myself. He was the head of this unit already beforehand. Still, the management team is around. And if you ask people there, you know, how did it go with this Roche Genentech integration? Yeah, nothing happened. It's just the same. And that is actually where you have to fight for, actually. Because in a big organization like ours, there will always be people who try, with really good intentions, who want to take out inefficiencies in the systems, who want to streamline, harmonize things, to avoid duplication. That's what you typically hear. I mean, in every acquisition, you have an army of people who comes in and says, well, there's all this duplication. Let's get rid of this duplication. My advice is, don't listen too much to those people. In case of doubt, I'd always go for 10% more inefficiencies, but also 10% more innovation. Now, the second element I'd like to share with you is follow on a few guiding principles. Now, even though I'm very convinced of a decentralized management approach, you need some kind of cohesion in a big organization. You need a common sense of purpose. We share some fundamental values. We have a code of conduct. There's also some powers which are reserved at a headquarter level. So if we do a big acquisition, for example, if we do big capital investments, key personnel decisions would be taken in the headquarter. But the important point is we keep that to a minimum. We're extremely public about it. Just a small little booklet where all these, I mean, it's very concrete, very practical. Up to this amount you can decide yourself, and otherwise you have to come and ask for a credit application. We keep this very, very thin. It's on the intranet, everybody can see that. And this is important. But it's not so important about the fact that you centralize certain key decisions which you want to keep together at a glance. What is really the important part is that the people really know what they can decide on their own. Because if you are not clear and if you are not explicit about that, what happens is people are uncertain and then they start delegating upwards. So it's extremely important, I believe, to define some key principles which are not negotiable because they enable actually a more decentralized approach. Now, my third element. Beware of consultants and visionary leaders. Now, the thing is, if your basic conviction is that freedom has a lot to do with innovation, and you want to give this freedom to the people, then what you also need is people who make something out of this freedom. And my experience is that there is really a very close correlation, how would you call this, the density of consultants on the one hand, and the weakness of the managers. A p-value with lots of zeros. Because it is typically those managers who don't know what they want that they go and look out for consultants. It's the managers who don't have self-confidence, who don't have determination, who ask for consultants and are not able really to use this freedom. And I'm equally skeptical of these visionary leaders. They make for good stories in media, on TV talk shows, etc. But it is my firm belief that innovation comes from the bottom. It doesn't come from the top. Innovation, and I would say leadership in general, is something which comes from the bottom. I have rather thousands of people who really have convictions, who follow their convictions, who follow their ideas, and who live their dreams. That is what makes a company innovative, and not one single guy who has all the revelations and brings them down into the organization. In San Francisco, we had a scientist, Napo Ferrara, and this guy was completely convinced about a specific mode of action. It's concerning a cancer drug, and nobody really believed it. So what he did is he went to the lab in the company over the weekend, did all the preclinical trials, and at some point he had some evidence that this actually could work. And then the company was coming in, putting more money behind it, and eventually it became an important cancer drug for us called Avastin. It's one of the leading cancer drugs in the world, 6 billion turnover, still growing. And, if you just wonder for a moment, what would have happened if you would have brought in consultants to help you with your R&D portfolio decisions and trade-offs. When I see the film in front of my eyes, first of all, I guarantee you, they would have made a stakeholder analysis. So who is really involved in the decision making? Let's identify those. Let's map them. Step number 2, let's send a questionnaire out to them. So to get all their wisdom, to get their input, let's involve them all so that we have the right fact base. This goes on and on and on. Eventually all the data come in, they are analyzed, and then comes the final step, the big hurrah, which is, let's present this to top management and give a recommendation. And I bet with you, what they will do is, we have to allocate the resources to the most promising projects. Wow. Wonderful. And do you think that Avastin would ever make it? For sure not. Because if you collect all the information in the organization, what you get is an average opinion. But what you don't get is breakthrough ideas. Real breakthrough innovation happens when you go against the crowd. If you do something which nobody believes it. Because if everybody would believe that it's working, probably there wouldn't be a breakthrough innovation anymore. See what I mean? So I feel this is a very, very important point. And all they did at the time is they didn't invite armies of consultants. The only thing they had to do is leave the lab open over the weekend. That was it. Also much cheaper. Now, let me get to a fourth element, and this is about celebrating failure. Of course, if you have a success like Avastin, you will have lots of people who are happy to join you celebrating such a success. And there's nothing wrong about it, and we should celebrate success. The problem is 90% of our projects fail. And I believe that failure is the other side of innovation. If you have a culture, in particular in a big company, where people are afraid to fail, then you kill innovation. And therefore, I mean this very serious. I mean this in a very tangible way. Sometimes, if we have a failed project, what I do is I invite the team over lunch, and we discuss about the learnings of that specific project. What can we do differently the next time, etc., etc. Then at one point, I would get out a bottle of champagne, and then we very formally celebrate the good work which has been done and the failure. And we all toast to this great failure which we achieved together. And sometimes I'm lucky, and somebody takes a photo, and these photos go viral. And I love it. Because what it signals to the organization is failure is all right. It's all right. You can fail. Actually, it's appreciated if you fail and if you try again and if you try again and if you try again. So I do believe this is very, very important. Now, let me close with a fifth element, and that is lead on behalf of the next generation. I just recently had the opportunity to present our company's results at the annual general meeting. And we had a good year, and I could present good results. But make no mistake, I mean, these results are not so much the result of the decisions I took over the last year. These results are very much a result of the decisions which were taken by my predecessor, and actually many of the decisions which were taken by my predecessor of the predecessor, my pre-predecessor. It was my pre-predecessor who at the end of the 80s and beginning of the 90s had this wisdom to invest into biotech and to go into biotech at a time when most people couldn't even write biotech. I remember at the time when we took a majority ownership in Genentech, our share price was going down because people said, I mean, they're completely crazy. They have no product, doesn't make sense. This will take years until you potentially see something. And actually, they were right. It took years. It took 10 years before the real tangible products were coming from Genentech and before they turned profitable. It took 10 years. It just shows to me how important it is that you think in long cycles in an industry where it takes you so many years to bring a new medicine to patients. I'm also in the lucky position that our company is still owned by the majority of the company is still owned by the founding families, Hoffmann and Oeri. And if I talk with peers, I see this difference, because if you have a shareholder like that, they don't care so much about the fluctuations of the share price and the quarterly results, because what they really care about is handing over their company in a healthy state to the next generation. And if you talk with them, they actually mean that. They want to hand over the company to the next generation, from the 4th to the 5th generation. And these are long cycles, and I think this is something which is in particular important in our industry. So to close up, I believe that innovation has a lot to do with freedom, and we need people who are guided by a few key principles and follow a long-term vision. Thank you very much, and with this I suggest we go right into your questions and comments.
Towards the back, there's one over there.
Jörg Kistler, Auckland University in New Zealand. And by the way, my dialect is Swiss English, just in case you wonder. A general observation in the pharma industry, I guess, is that innovation can be either in-house, or you outsource it, or you partner, or you acquire small companies with a good drug candidate and so on. What's your view on the general trends that, in terms of being sustainable into the future, given all the various hurdles that pharma is facing with reimbursement, etc., and also what is particularly Roche's view in that?
Right. I think external innovation, and to bring in external innovation into the company, is absolutely vital. And I think it is also vital that you make no difference where the innovation comes from. It doesn't matter whether it comes from within the company or from some external academic institution or another pharma company, a biotech company. I think it's really, really important. The complexity of this field is so huge. And I keep saying that even though we are very proud of our science and our scientists, 99% of the innovation, just for quantitative reasons, 99% of the innovation happens outside of our company's walls. So it is essential for us to tap into external innovation. And I think actually it's always been a strength of our company to be able to work together with partners. And actually, I also believe it has a lot to do with this decentralized approach. Because the way we work internally, we also work with external partners. We don't feel that we have to, how shall I say this, control everything, almost digest it, and you wonder what comes out. So we keep it, like a fleet of approaches. Very often those companies would stay where they are, and even if they're very small units, we would not necessarily integrate them. We had an acquisition in Switzerland, a company called Glycard, a spin-off of ETH. You might have heard about that. Now, they had their place in Schlieren. Now, Schlieren is a village outside of Zurich, not the nicest place in the world. On top of it, I hope nobody's from Schlieren. On top of it, it is only about 40 minutes away from our main center in Basel. I bet with you, many companies would have said, well, that just doesn't make sense. It's so inefficient. They have their own infrastructure, blah, 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 blah. Let's get rid of this duplication. Let's invite them to join our labs in Basel and integrate them. Now we actually asked them what their plans are, what they want to do, etc. And we paid a lot of money for them, so somehow they must have done something right. And they had very personal preferences, whether you believe it or not. Some of them wanted to live in Schlieren, and then we said, okay, stay there, fine. And now it is almost 8 years later. We launched GapSummit just last year, which is a major opportunity, a blockbuster medicine developed by this small group of about 50 people or so. Of course, they work together with the rest of the organization, but they stayed pretty independent. Tells you also that innovation is not a matter of scale. So anyway, very, very important. Now you asked for what is the trend? Is it getting more or less? I also asked this question. And it's quite interesting to see. We seem to have, as a company, and that's different, I guess, from company to company, we seem to have found a balance which is okay for us. So it's about a third of our medicines which are marketed, which come from the outside, from licensing deals, acquisitions, etc. And if you look at our current pipeline, it's about a third as well. So that seems to be a ratio which works well for our company, and the trend is pretty stable. Yes, please.
Thanks for sharing the key elements about how you think about innovation. My question is about organizational innovation. Introducing
about?
Organizational innovation.
Okay.
Introducing an innovative idea and actually implementing it, there's a huge adoption or diffusion process involved. And I was curious if you could share your experience with that process, whether inside Roche or overall in the industry. What challenges are faced for the adoption?
Yeah, I come back to the point I made. Especially in the earlier part of the value chain, if you talk about discovery, if you talk about research, I think freedom is the name of the game. I think people really should have the liberty and the freedom to do what they think is the right thing to do. And they really know what's going on. It's not me sitting in the headquarter office. It's the scientists who are really close to what is happening, and they would have the ideas. And then you have to give them enough space to work on those ideas. The more you progress in the value chain, then the more organized you get, if you like. So when you come into late-stage development, for example, and it makes a lot of sense to leverage the worldwide infrastructure. And it would be counterproductive if everybody, does it on his or her own. That is a point when you bring the things together. The same is true if you position a medicine. If you bring it to the market, you make use of your global network. So it's a continuum. In the beginning, absolute freedom to the degree that you don't even know what's going on. One of my research heads, he keeps saying, I get really, really worried if I walk through the labs and I'm not surprised anymore. So he says it's very, very important if there's a lot of stuff going on he doesn't even know about. Because the moment he knows about it, it's already a sign that it's too organized. And I think there is something to that. And then, if you come to the very late stage, when you come to the commercialization, then it's more organized. But you have to find this balance. In case of doubt, I'd always go for the more decentralized approach, because a big organization tends to centralize things. So in a way, I see my role as the CEO to constantly decentralize, constantly remind people to delegate decision-making and not fall into this trap of believing that they know better than other people. I think it has I think it is a key factor. You need an affinity to science. You need to have a passion for what you do. That is, of course, there's you really get to what is it all? What is it? And I always wonder myself, and what really is driving innovation? And probably I'll never kind of finally come to a conclusion. But the one thing I know for sure, it has to do with people's brains. There's something happening with people, you know. You can't read it in a textbook. You can't there's no recipe. It happens in people's brains when people interact with each other. And doesn't fall from the sky. You know, there is, sorry, I'll come back now. It's such a fascinating topic. Sorry that I get carried away. But we have a program where we sponsor arts. So Roche has a long tradition of sponsoring arts. So we have a program which is called commissions. And what we do is we commission contemporary musicians, less known musicians, to produce a piece of music. And this piece of music is then performed, first in Switzerland, then in the US. And I tell you this because I always have this opportunity. It happens every second year. And then I always have the opportunity to sit together with this artist, you know, after the performance on the dinner table. And this artist is free to invite other artists. So you have other musicians there, you have painters, etc., poets, etc. A very fascinating table. And I had the opportunity to participate several times. And, you know, at some point, I have an N of 3 now. I asked the question, so actually, you know, what is the reason that you came up with this piece of music? You know, why did it happen? Why do we suddenly have this innovative piece of music, which wasn't there before? Can you give me a bit of flavor? What is the secret? And then the discussion goes off. You know, then you have thousands of opinions. But so far, N of 3, at the end of the day, they always agree that it has a lot to do with freedom. As an artist, they are not bound to some norms in society. They can do whatever they want to do. You know, they went abroad, they kind of did this and that. And that was somehow the environment they needed to be innovative. And from a CEO role point of view, you know, all what I can do is provide an environment. I can't do the music writing. I can't do the scientific work. All I can do is provide the room so that it happens. You know, it's such a fascinating question. I also, and I think there is a connection between artists and scientists. It all has a lot to do with innovation. What I also did is, I looked at our breakthrough innovations in the past. And then I invited the people where I was, where I knew those were really the people behind this innovation. And many of them have retired. So I have these tables with retirees around, you know, same room, lunch. And then I asked them, so what was the story? How could that happen? And I tell you, it is so often the case that they would tell me, well, actually, nobody knew about it. We had the submarine project, which we kind of cross-subsidized with some other money, and we covered it up until it was at a certain stage where you could really do something with it. Or you hear, well, I had really a great boss who gave me all the freedom, and I could do this and that and so on. I really do believe it has a lot to do with freedom. Then, of course, you need people who have the passion, who have the energy, who really want to make a difference for patients, etc. Yeah, I rest my case. We had a question here, and then we go to the middle. Can we have a mic here? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've been talking a lot about change, innovation, and evolution, right? But however, the pharma business model that you presented at the beginning of your talk doesn't seem to have changed much over the years. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it will change to adapt to like this new evolving pharmaceutical environment and biotech environment? And where do you see that in the next 50 years or so?
My point really was, and I know it's a bit boring, I think that the underlying business model is valid. And I think we should stand up for it. I think it brought mankind a lot, and we should not endanger it. We should fight for it. You know, I see many people and companies, you know, they are so shy, and there's some criticism from here and there, and they fall over the place, and they want to say what people want to hear and all of that. I think we have to tell the people what is right, and this model has served mankind very well. Of course it will evolve, there's no doubt. As you have seen on the regulatory side, adaptive trial design, of course it will evolve. It very much evolves on the commercial side, where we shift much more from a uniform pricing policy across the world to much more differentiated pricing models according to purchasing powers in the respective countries, etc. But the underlying model as such, I think, is a valid one, and it's okay, and it's fine, and we should stand up for it, and we should fight for it, because it's the good and the right thing to do.
Quick follow-up. What is the strongest point of this model, in your opinion?
Yeah, if I look at success, I tend to look at what is the track record, what has happened. And for me, very often, this is a good indication. I mean, if I recruit a person, one of the things, you have a conversation, but one of the things you look at, what is the track record? And if I look at this business model, I look at the track record of what changed, or what was the contribution of the pharmaceutical industry to society, and it's tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And we as an industry should be proud about that, and we should speak about it. Our reputation often is kind of next to the tobacco companies, which is hilarious. Think about it. Industry made also a lot of mistakes. That's true. So did other industries. But there's no reason to just kind of talk it down all the time.
We're still above politicians.
We have a question here.
I have a question about Roche in particular. So obviously there's been a trend recently in big pharma for R&D budgets to be slashed. Now, of course, there's a lot of restructuring going on in R&D, which makes it understandable. But of course at Roche there is a lot of change as well, especially with John Reed coming into PRED. But yet Roche maintain one of the highest R&D budget in pharma. What's setting Roche apart that allows them to do this? Is it a different mission, a different value?
Well, first of all, we have an extremely focused strategy. So if you compare our strategy with some of our peers, then we are really, really focused on innovation. We are active in pharmaceuticals, which makes about 80% of our business, and diagnostics, which makes about 20% of our business. We also try to leverage the synergies between the two. Personalized healthcare was one of the keywords. But we are very focused. If you look at other companies in the field, they are also active, many of them are also active in other fields, like in OTC, like in generics, and there you have less of an R&D spend. So I would say, first of all, the high R&D spend is a reflection of our strategy, and it's a reflection of our belief in innovation. It's not only about money, but money is also important. And we also had our up and downs, but we had the luxury, perhaps also due to our shareholder structure, that we could keep spending, and we increased. Where we had phases where our sales were coming down, we were convinced that we are investing into the right portfolio, and we continued to increase R&D. Now that takes a lot of guts if you talk with the financial community. I think it makes a difference of whether you know that your main shareholder stands behind you or not. You have seen different strategies. Some of the companies, I would say they lost their soul. When things were not going so well, when the financial crisis came in, they followed the analysts. They did what was the right thing to optimize the business in the short term. I don't blame them. But as a result of that, you lose what it is really about. And I have respect for other companies who were in big troubles, not only companies like ours where you had a majority ownership of a family, who really stick to their guns. BMS, for example, I have a lot of respect for them. So it was all declining, they had big products coming off, and they continued to invest into R&D. They entered lots of creative partnerships, and they came out of this again. So I'm very optimistic about this industry. I think it's worthwhile to invest into science and into research and development. And you should not, research and development follows very long cycles. You should not adapt to those long cycles because your annual sales are going up and down a bit. That would be the wrong approach. And you have to have the guts to go through such a phase and defend it. And it's not easy, I tell you. In 2009, this was, my first annual press conference, I took over as CEO. I was also a bit naive, and I wouldn't do it the same way again. So I was coming to this presentation, and we had our challenges. Midst of the financial crisis, we lost one or two late-stage, late-stage opportunities. This was a time when everybody was talking about R&D productivity, but what they meant was slashing R&D. And I was standing there, and I said, if you don't like it, invest your money into another company. Big mistake. Big mistake. Don't do that. You can bring over the message in different ways. And I was hammered. It took at least 2 or 3 years until I recovered from that single sentence. And still, it was true. You help me. You help me. Okay. Very good.
I could. Hi. You touched about several points. One of them is freedom. And then another one that you touched, it was intrapreneurship, which is entrepreneurship from the company. Even if you presented a couple of cases where are acquisitions that you have done as success story. But because we are the new leaders of this future biotechnology, and I wanted to touch in the 2 points that you did about the future, about your 2 beliefs. And one of them is the revolution guided by data and genetics. How Roche is preparing for that, which is in your blueprint, in your strategy for the future, that one.
It's certainly a huge opportunity which is opening up here. I mean, the DNA was of course already identified as such 50 years ago. I think it was in the 50s, Watson Crick here in this country, where the basic mechanism of life was understood. But the reality is that it took until recently, or let me say like this, over the last 50 years, there was an enormous progress in terms of understanding how life works. So how is DNA translated into messenger RNA? How is this translated into proteins? How is it translated into cells? How is it translated into tissue, etc.? And that was all very important. But it is only since recently that we understand what is going wrong. And that is the important part if you develop a medicine. Because what you have to understand is, why is this disease happening? What is actually happening along certain signaling pathways in your immune system, etc. We are only at the very beginning. We are only at the very beginning. For certain diseases like neuroscience, we are just scratching, the surface. So I think there is an enormous opportunity as we will better understand the underlying molecular mechanisms, how things go wrong, including in the brain. Neuroscience I'm very bullish about. If you look at oncology about 20, 30 years ago, all we could do was cut out the cancer and give chemotherapy, which really kills all the cells, including the cancer cells. And it was only, and we could diagnose the cancer from the phenotype. You look at the tumor, yeah, this is cancer. But we had no clue what was going on in the cancer. I think somebody referred to 10 types of breast cancer. It was only when we started to understand the molecular pathways, what is happening in cancer cells, that we found, and what is going wrong in cancer cells, that we found new targets, which then were the basis for all the medicines which have been launched literally over the last decade. And if you look at the brain, it very much reminds me of what was happening in oncology 20 years ago. We now start to understand for diseases like Alzheimer's and others, what is going on in the brain on a molecular level. Alzheimer, was diagnosed 100 years ago. Mr. Alzheimer, post-mortem, looked at the brains, you saw all this plaque, and, it's toxic, patient died, fine. All you knew until recently was the phenotype. And now we start to understand what is happening along the pathways. You know, which enzymes and proteins are cut off in the brain, and how is this folded into this plaque, which then sits around the nerve cells and which is probably toxic. And as such, we have lots of targets along the disease pathway. That's what I mean makes a lot of difference. Now, the other element which comes in, this is the biology side, if you like. The other element which comes in is, of course, the proposition that we can use data in a much more sophisticated way in the future. If we are successful in first digitizing real-world outcome data, if we are successful in correlating this with disease patterns, I'm sure we can learn a lot from that, and that will give us, again, lots of hints in terms of not only current treatments, but also new hypotheses of developing new medicines as we better analyze this enormous pool of data, which today is really in the physical archives of the physicians. It's not used at all. So I think there is, it's greenfield. Unlimited demand. 2/3 of all the diseases cannot be treated today. And for many of the diseases where we have a treatment, the treatment is not adequate. I mean, show me another industry where you have a situation like that. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. The opportunities are just kind of unlimited, literally unlimited. And I don't believe that these naysayers, we are at the end of it. You know this Max Planck story? Somebody was at Max Planck. You were Max Planck. So you know with this anecdote about Max Planck, when he decided, 19th century, went to his professors and said, I don't know what I want to study. And then the professors said, yeah, well, do this or that, but don't go into physics. Because, at the time, all the progress which was made in the 19th century in physics, at the time, people thought we are at the end of it. So in Germany, at the time, people thought now the main discoveries have been made. Finished. Physics is at the end. Now, he nevertheless decided to go for physics, and the rest is history. And if I meet some people who tell me now, well, we are at the end of it, I can only laugh. I don't believe that. In 10, 20 years, we will all be surprised how much medicine has progressed. And how much it is still to progress in the years to come. You help me. Only with, maybe. Perhaps I have to be shorter with my answers. Please. Do you have? Yes.
So I would like to refer to Graham's question about the budget on innovation. Well, not exactly the budget, but the innovation. So you definitely spend a lot of money to innovate as a company, and you mentioned that you create the environment of freedom for your employees and for the researchers. But at the end of the day, the innovation does not come from the money spent, but from the human mind, as you said. And you said as well that the musicians, I think, they need to interact to create something innovative as well. Yes. Does Roche as a company...
And they get inspired by others.
Exactly.
It doesn't
and sometimes on the introduction of different ideas is the best idea. And it's just a side product of different approaches.
Right.
Does Roche as an organization create such an innovative environment for groups, not only for individuals, but giving them freedom and trust, but for example, by organizing think tanks or just getting together for like-minded people within the research area?
Yep. Yeah, I don't like to do this from the top, to create a think tank, and all these kind of knowledge-sharing platforms and so on. We all tried that, and it never worked. I think what really has to happen is it has to come bottom up. What you can do, it's embarrassingly simple, but it has an effect. You have to think of how you co-locate people. That actually plays a role. It is the truth that if you sit on the next floor, you just don't go down or up. You have to almost force yourself to kind of get into the elevator and go down one floor. You can happily spend the whole day on one floor, and the people are on the next floor, and you phone them. You know, you don't take the effort to go down. And I think this is, I mean, it's almost part of the physical environment. You can help to make these interactions. Currently in Basel, you know, we run out of space, so we are looking at how do we organize ourselves. You know, and I sit in the steering committee of that project because I feel it's so important. And what I do is I look, you know, how do we build this whole thing so that you don't have this kind of sandwich type of tower, but some more interactive communication zones, if you like. And I'm personally involved in terms of who sits where. You know, we have a decentralized management approach, but this is, it's not in this booklet, but sometimes I take the freedom to intervene a bit. So I don't underestimate those simple things. I once had a manager in Germany, by the way. I was once working in Germany. I'm Austrian, so I was working in Germany, and this manager came to me. I was very young in my career, and they were just building a new place there. And he took me, and we went to this building, and he was literally selecting the carpets. It was the general manager of Germany. It's not a small country, you know. And he was selecting the carpets. And he told me, now I tell you a lesson for your life. There are two things you have to take personally care of. One is offices, and the second one is the car policy. And you know, I'm not so sure about the car policy, but as far as offices is concerned and how you structure your physical setup actually plays a role. I think that is important. Anyway, we got a bit off track here, and I didn't speak. I was not. We still have a question, yes. Right? Okay. Good. You choose.
No, you go. You're the chef.
Please, over there. Yeah, you have a mic already. Very good.
Thank you. So my question is about, from your talk, we know your attitude about the failures. So you can celebrate failure in Roche. So I'm wondering, in academic, it's totally different. In academic, if you have failure in your experiments, then you cannot publish your results. Mm-hmm. But in industry, besides you celebrate and toast the failure, and how you deal with the failure for your next innovation. So from your personal experience or
right.
opinion.
Yeah, actually, I think very often you can learn as much from failures as you can learn from successes. And actually, we do publish our failures. So we also, you know, there are legal reasons to do it anyway, in particular when it comes to clinical trials. But also if it's early research work, we actually also publish that, and we encourage to publish that. You know, it's also a signal we send to the outside because we want to attract certain type of people into our organization. And I do believe it's also good for the research and the academic environment, because if you publish that and if it's known outside, then you know you have an enormous effect, because a lot of people are not making the same mistakes and they are not running into the same areas. So we had a big failure with the cardiovascular medicine. Lots of people were working on that. It was a big disappointment. But one of the things we did is we actually shared the data. We brought them out into the community. And, you know, we did that just for, you know, almost ethical reasons, if you like. We felt that was also good for our reputation. But interestingly enough, now a company came back and said, well, actually, they have found something in this data set which makes them believe that for a specific indication, they could work with the medicine, which we had completely written off. And as a result of that, you know, we have started a negotiation to out-license the product. We won't pursue it ourselves, but this other company is going to pursue it. And if they are right, which I hope, then it's certainly good for this company. And it's also good for us because we have an additional royalty stream. So I truly believe that being transparent about failures, admitting failures, is very, very important to foster innovation. One more. Okay, one more. Last one.
Thank you very much. Microphones everywhere coming. Okay, thank you for this last question. So I'm really interested in your last example, because that shows that actually I think, okay, one of the aspects that I think is a problem at the moment in biotech and pharma is for the innovation ecosystem to allow in-licensing of assets and out-licensing of assets. So a lot of big pharma companies are especially good at in-licensing assets, but when you actually come with a failure and you park your asset, to then say, okay, let's be brave, let's let other people play with it and out-license it, that's where a lot of the innovation gets blocked. So if there would be better mechanisms to allow other people to play with the assets that you have as a failure or parked, I think this is a really key step in the innovation ecosystem. So I'm wondering whether you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think it is a valid point you make. A hurdle often is if a big pharmaceutical company decides to stop the development of an asset, then of course the external world is extremely skeptical about doing something with this asset, because they say, well, if they stopped it, can't be really an opportunity, otherwise they wouldn't have stopped it. You know, there is this element of asymmetric information. If you go out and you say this is a great asset, but for strategic reasons we don't pursue it, the other side is always a bit skeptical. I mean, how strategic is it really? Or does this thing just simply not work? I think that's a really, you know, a very tangible hurdle you have to overcome. What works quite well in my experience is if indeed for strategic reasons you say, I don't do research anymore in a specific area, what works well is if you spin out a whole group of assets, for example, and you found another company. And if you then put in equity yourself, then this is also a signal for the outside world that you have belief in it, otherwise you wouldn't put money into it. We did this twice in a bigger way. One company is called Actelion. They have gone into cardiovascular. And it is an area which we would have stopped, and it was very difficult to out-license that. So we did kind of a management buyout, if you like, where we put equity in and we get royalties, and it has become extremely successful. A second example is a company called Basilea. At some point we said we go out of antibiotics. We did a spin-off. Eventually they developed nicely, did some collaboration with J&J in this specific case. Again, was very good for us because we had an equity stake in it, so we could also benefit from the value which was generated. So yeah, I think it is important not only to look at the big successes, but also try to extract value from the products you don't pursue anymore. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the discussion.
Thank you very much. I've got a little thing for you.